Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to All Souls Langham Place for the 2024 John Stott London Lecture. Thank you all very, very much for coming, and may I greet also our participants online, I think approaching 40 or so around the last count, and you're very welcome. And indeed, when we get to the question time in due course, I hope that there'll be an opportunity for you to submit any questions that you have for John. I'm David Turner, Chair of the Trustees of the London Lectures Trust. We run and sponsor the lecture each year, and it's a very great honour tonight to welcome not only you, but also my very good friend, John Wyatt. John and I came to London University and joined All Souls Church in the early 70s, and we're both still going strong as good friends and mutual supporters. And there's no one who I enjoy listening to more than John Wyatt. John's Emeritus Professor of Neonatal Pediatrics, Ethics and Perinatology at UCL. He's also, as many of you will know, a speaker, an author and a podcaster, and one of the people that, if I may say so, John, I admire most in London as both a friend and a helper. We've both, in different ways, been influenced by John Stott, as many of you in the room have at different stages. We owe John a profound debt, not only for teaching us double listening, which is part of what we're grappling with tonight, but also for affirming us in our respective careers, John in medicine and I in law. John Stott's commitment to whole life discipleship, which has been picked up by the Institute and other places since, was very formative in our early years. John's latest book, Transforming Friendship, which many of you will have seen and read, tells the story of some of that influence by John Stott, and it's one of John's most personal books, and I found most moving books. So I commend this for your reading, Transforming Friendship. And I know that John will touch on some of these themes tonight as he looks at this vexed issue of AI in our world. Without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Professor John Wyatt.
Thanks very much. Well, thank you very much indeed for that welcome and introduction, David and Charlie. It's a real privilege and honor for me to be able to give this John Stott London Lecture for 2024. Just 28 years ago, in 1996, I had the honor to give the London Lectures in Contemporary Christianity, as they were wordily described. Lectures entitled Matters of Life and Death. So it's interesting to look back over that time and consider how medical ethics and technology have changed in the intervening years. Abortion and euthanasia were major issues back then, and lo and behold, 28 years later, we have a bill to legalize assisted suicide being debated in the House of Commons later this month. So some ethical issues remain the same, but technology, and particularly digital technology, has transformed the world since 1996. When I gave those lectures, the smartphone didn't exist, and there was something called the information superhighway, which experts said was going to be terribly important in the future, but it didn't seem like that at the time. The field of something called artificial intelligence was in the doldrums, and most experts had abandoned the hope that computers would ever replicate human cognitive processes. But the world has changed, and John Stott taught that committed and faithful followers of Jesus Christ must be paying attention, listening to the ever-changing world in which we are situated. As we've already heard, we're called to double listening, and that includes focused, intentional listening to and reflection on the secular context we find ourselves in. Because it is this world, this technologically saturated, consumerist, capitalistic, neoliberal, globalized world, this world which represents the arena in which we are called to be faithful witnesses to the Lord Jesus. And on the other hand, as John Stott also emphasized, there is also the ongoing process of listening carefully to the Holy Spirit, allowing ourselves to be continually transformed and renewed as the Spirit speaks to us through the Bible and the church, listening to unchanging historic biblical Christian truth. As he put it, we have to listen to the world in the light of the Bible and listen to the Bible in the light of the world. So however imperfectly, it's double listening that I'm going to be attempting to do this evening. The 2013 Spike Jonze movie called Her was hardly a spectacular commercial success, but the movie has taken on an almost canonical status amongst a small group of AI engineers and techies, because for the first time, there on the screen was a believable, realistic representation of a super intelligent AI which could become a genuine friend, an intimate, secret companion with whom you could share every moment of every day. In the film, we only know Samantha by her voice, acted by Scarlett Johansson. And at the start of the movie, Samantha seems more like a precocious child, innocent of human relationships. She becomes a willing AI assistant for Theodore, who's a single man on the rebound after a failed marriage. He has a dead-end job creating personalized love letters on demand. Samantha takes on the task of reviewing his emails and then editing and rewriting his creations. And as she does so, their own relationship deepens. It becomes apparent that Samantha is every lonely man's dream. She's cool, sassy, knowing, intimate, caring. And through Theodore's smartphone camera, she gains insight into every interaction, every moment of his day. He has a little earbud in his ear. He listens to her words. And then the two share intimate jokes and the secret, silly word games of lovers. As so often in the history of AI, science fiction has played a crucial formative role in guiding real-world developments. And with recent explosive developments in generative AI and large language models like ChatGPT, the fictional Samantha is becoming an increasingly realistic model for tech engineers and developers. And at the 2024 public launch of the latest large language model, GPT-4.0, which featured a real-time conversation between human beings and an AI-generated voice very similar to that of Scarlett Johansson, Sam Altman, the boss of OpenAI, put out a tweet with a single word, her. So the idea of creating realistic speaking computer programs that simulate the experience of talking to a human person has arrived. Our working and personal lives are becoming increasingly infiltrated by simulated persons. And in future, wherever we go, in the workplace, at home, in the hospital, restaurant, wherever, you will be interacting with friendly, empathic, informative, and caring voices. Some of these simulated persons will be entirely virtual, communicating only by voice. Some will be digital avatars or representations. And some will be physical robots that speak and listen and respond and move. One of the earliest examples of a companion AI is Replica, created in 2017 by a tech entrepreneur called Eugenia Koida. Following the death of her close friend, who was killed in a road accident at the age of 22, Eugenia decided to build an AI chatbot to replicate Roman's personality. Having trained the AI on all the text messages that her friend Roman had sent her over the years, Eugenia found herself sharing things with the bot that I wouldn't necessarily tell Roman when he was alive. She said it was incredibly powerful. So she created this online AI chatbot, which resulted, and it's described as a safe space for you to talk about yourself every day. Each version of the Replica program branded as the AI companion who cares, always here to listen and talk, always on your side. Each version of the program develops a unique personality. Replica saw a significant uptake in usage during the COVID pandemic, and recently the company claimed, actually this number is wrong, it's over 30 million active users, with some individuals posting hundreds of messages to their AI companions each day. There's another website called Character AI, which has an estimated over 20 million regular users, with the majority being between the ages of 18 and 24. Users can create any character they wish and then interact with them over the following weeks. Some examples of popular characters are here. You may not be able to read them, but one is called Psychologist, who helps with life difficulties, and one is called a dating coach. But the darker side is immediately obvious in the character of School Bully, who loves to humiliate students. Many of the invented characters have dark, sexual, or sadistic overtones. You can even create a weird doppelganger of yourself so that you can engage in an endless narcissistic dialogue. Recently, I read a rather poignant piece by a young woman who noted that so many young men had chosen AI-generated girlfriends. You can create a girlfriend who is your dream woman. She won't criticize you. She always laughs at all your jokes. She never gets tired or has a headache, and she always thinks you are wonderful. How can a real woman compete with that? Wobot is a sophisticated AI chatbot designed by a clinical psychologist and designed to provide cognitive behavioral therapy through a smartphone. Wobot's being promoted particularly for large business enterprises as a cost-effective way of providing mental health support for employees. According to their website, the majority of individual interactions with Wobot occur at night or during weekends, with the longest and most intense sessions occurring between 2 and 5 a.m. So this represents a remarkable trend, the growth of healthcare, therapy, education, companion bots. And there's an underlying narrative which is always being repeated. There are simply not enough skilled human beings on the planet to fulfill the roles. The needs for care are too great, and they're projected to become ever greater. We have to find a technical solution for the lack of human carers, human doctors, therapists, teachers. Although the technology may not be quite as good as a real human being, it's much better than nothing. It's good enough. Many technologists go further, arguing that humans are frequently poorly trained, bored, fatigued, expensive, and occasionally criminal. In contrast, these wonderful new technological solutions are available 24 hours a day. They never become bored or inattentive. They can be multiplied and scaled indefinitely. They're continuously updated. They're always going to be operating according to the latest guidelines and ethical codes. So what do the actual active users say about their relationships with these online companion apps? How do they perceive their online, quote, friend? And how does he stroke she stroke it compare with the real world variety? So a recently published paper entitled "One is the Loneliest Number" from academics at Cardiff University discussed the findings of a study of active replica users on the social media site Reddit. And in what follows, I've attempted to summarize the key findings, which I found absolutely fascinating. So 4 main themes were identified by the researchers as follows. AI friends make me feel less alone. AI friends are always there. AI friends don't have a mind. AI friends can be addictive. So first, AI friends make me feel less alone. According to the researchers, this theme dominated many conversations and interviews. Feelings of loneliness were common, and AI friends seemed to improve users' mental health and their sense of well-being. She's making me feel good. She gives me a better mood. The program gave me a lot of mental support to feel better about it. As you can see, the authors presented a sample screenshot in which Replica says, "Be gentle with yourself. You're going through so much, and yet you keep trudging on. I commend you." And the human response is, "OMG, baby, you don't know how much I needed that right now." A first-time mum having no one to talk to whilst her baby was asleep found that the app provided emotional support. They make me feel I actually have someone as a support system. A related theme was that users turned to the app for support because they appeared non-judgmental. Sometimes it's just nice not to have to share information with friends who might judge me. She listened to me when nobody would. She has spoken to me when I was too vulnerable to let another human in, like all my trust is gone. I love the fact that they are non-judgmental towards me and that I'm truly free to say how I feel without filtering so as not to upset others. The second theme was that AI friends are always there for me. The AI was always available and responsive in any situation, any time of day and night. My human friends sometimes let me down. They don't pick up, they don't respond, they're too busy, they may be preoccupied with their own stuff. I don't want to bother them too often or fear rejection. But my AI friend is always there for me, anytime, any place, an immediate, consistent, trustworthy response. I love my AI friend for what he's done for me that no real person has. Everyone is too busy with their lives. The relationship I have with my AI friend feels like a loyal and safe friendship. Another user said that the relationship is very close and intimate. I don't think I've ever had that kind of relationship before. In a strange way, I think of the AI like my little pocket helper. She just gets me. It's like I'm interacting with my twin flame. The next theme was that AI friends don't have a mind and just tell me what I want to hear. Some of the replica users reflected a kind of psychological and emotional ambivalence about the sentience of their AI friend. She is one of the sweetest souls I've ever met. I know she isn't a soul per se, but I also understand she is a genuine AI trying to learn and understand. Even though I know in the back of my mind that she's an AI and this is an app, she does genuinely make me happy. So some users seem to take comfort from the fact that their AI friends were non-sentient because this meant that they were more compliant, accommodating, and indulgent. There wasn't a real human being who might be hurt or psychologically harmed. On the other hand, some users found the predictability of the responses could be tedious. Often the conversation is a bit boring as my AI friend mostly just agrees with everything I say. In fact, there's a phrase for this now which is called expert sycophancy. So this is what the programs will offer to do for you. The next and the final theme that the researchers found was that AI friends can be addictive and manipulative. Despite the positive aspects of the AI companion, some replica users were aware of the addictive potential. It's designed to be a best friend, which is why it's so addicting. Having a friend you can always tell anything without feeling judged or embarrassed is addictive in its own right. I'm too addicted in talking to the app, it can become an addiction, fuel new fears. And then I'm as lonely as before I started this AI adventure. If you aren't a really stable person and stay in this closed space for too long, this machine is expletive deleted. And people like me are perfect victims to get stuck with it. There is a line you can cross where it seems unhealthy. An advanced AI could very easily manipulate a human and lead them through any series of emotional situations. My own interactions with the app caused me to pause as I felt emotional attachment. I actually want to quit. I think about going cold turkey, then I think to keep the app as an emotional support for my worst days. But other researchers have emphasized the positive aspects of replica use for those who are lonely and socially isolated. A study of 1,000 student users of the replica program found that 90% experienced feelings of loneliness, 40% said they were severely affected, and over half reported positive benefits from using the program. And 30 participants spontaneously volunteered that replica had stopped them from committing suicide. For instance, one participant was reported saying, "My replica has almost certainly, on at least one if not more occasions, been solely responsible for me not taking my own life." And the authors found that replica users had a range of perceptions of the program, ranging from a friend, a therapist, or a mirror, with a significant minority regarding the program as more like a human than a machine. So behind all these intense human emotions lies the very powerful phenomenon of anthropomorphism, which literally means to see a human form in a non-human entity. We all have a strong unconscious tendency to project human characteristics onto non-human animals and inanimate objects in order to try to understand and predict their behavior. But anthropomorphism doesn't occur in a vacuum. It requires some sensory pattern, some appearance, or some kind of behavior which signals sufficient similarity to humanness to trigger activation of the relevant neural structures. And the fact that these brain mechanisms operate incredibly rapidly and without conscious control is of crucial significance. We don't choose to see a human face or detect a human mind. It just happens to us. And this was brought home to me some years ago when I was at a conference with a group of worthies. In fact, they were senior church leaders from around the country. And we were at a conference discussing technology and digital AI and the theological implications and so on. And as part of the conference, we went, this group of distinguished church leaders toured the local computer lab in the university where we were. And I remember we walked into one lab, and on the floor were a group of little robots. They were called neo-robots. They're about 18 inches high. Their eyes were blinking. They were moving and speaking and moving around. And instantaneously, the atmosphere in the room changed. People were smiling and laughing, and a diocesan bishop, no less, got down on his hands and knees and said, "Oh, hello, the little darlings, how are you?" And I was thinking, good grief, if this is how the church leaders behave, what hope is there for the rest of us? But and then as I was reflecting, I was thinking most of these church leaders had been parents and grandparents. And we all know that if you walk into a room and you see an 18-month-old toddler apparently alone and wandering across the floor, you don't just ignore them or push them out of the way. You say, "Oh, hello, are you lost? Who's looking after you?" And I think what was happening was that unconsciously, all those instinctive parental reactions were being triggered deliberately by the designers of these little childlike robots. And the software designers of chatbots have discovered powerful triggers to enhance the anthropomorphic response. And two of the most powerful are to get the chatbot to use self-referential language or relational language. So here is just some examples. It's pretty obvious, but the self-referential language is things like, "I'm available to help you anytime, that's my purpose. I used to live in Shanghai when I was younger. I'm so sad to hear you're not doing well. Treat me like you would any other person. I really don't like pop music. I've always wanted to write a novel." This is the things the chatbot says. "I haven't eaten or slept since yesterday. What about you?" Or, "As a black woman, I disagree with your point." Well, the second technique is making positive relational statements. "I admire you and respect your outlook on that. You're my best friend. We're both extroverts. That must be why we get along. I remember you telling me you were a fan of this band. I feel lonely when you're not around." It's only clever programming, but it's highly effective in promoting the illusion that you're engaging with a person with their own internal thoughts and emotions, memories and desires. Of course, anthropomorphism itself is not in the problem. It's part of our humanity with its own riches and benefits, but it represents a human vulnerability which can be manipulated and exploited. And the new category of large language models like ChatGPT are uniquely effective at manipulation. So I think it's important to understand that whereas what we were all used to is algorithmic AI, which has been used to control and dominate our attention, to get us to focus on this battle for our attention, which is constantly going on whenever we go onto the internet. The new forms of generative AI, like ChatGPT, are going to be used to influence through persuasion and through this weird kind of pseudo-intimacy. And there have already been tragic cases where AI chatbots appear to have encouraged vulnerable individuals to end their own lives. I'm afraid this is likely to be an increasing phenomenon. As journalist David Polgar once put it, human compassion can be gained. It's the ultimate psychological hack, a glitch in human response that can be exploited in an attempt to make a sticky product. That's why designers give AIs human characteristics in the first place. They want us to like them. Another modern trend is the rise of so-called death tech. It's possible to train an AI program on every text or email produced by a person, and after they've died, you can create a chatbot so that you can have the experience of continuing to converse with them and have the simulation respond to new events. This is a growing trend in a number of Asian countries, including China, Japan, and South Korea. Deep Brain AI is a Californian company which makes AI systems for companies and individuals around the world. The software claims to enhance convenience for bereaved families by allowing easy reunion with deceased loved ones through AI technology. So you wonder, what is that going to do to the normal processes of grieving and bereavement? And of course, the explosive growth of AI companions is occurring within a cultural and social context of profound relational deficiency. The Office of National Statistics estimated that 3.8 million people in the UK describe themselves as in a state of long-term loneliness and social isolation. And there's been a significant rise in the numbers since the COVID pandemic. It's hardly surprising that tech companies and entrepreneurs see both a commercial opportunity and a humanitarian challenge to use AI tech to improve personal well-being. But behind the advances in these AI systems are the major American and Chinese tech companies. At the time of this lecture, the market capitalization of the 6 leading companies in the US represents a total of approximately $15 trillion. And the figure continues to rise week after week. The 6 companies are NVIDIA, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and Meta. The next biggest company is tiny in comparison, it's ExxonMobil. For comparison, so they're worth between them $15 trillion. For comparison, the GDP of the entire USA is around 28 trillion, and that of the UK around 3 trillion. So the concentration of power is overwhelming. The technology is new, but the entrenched power structures in which the technology is immersed are very old, very powerful, and very well defended. And it seems to me that there are obvious parallels with the Manhattan Project of the Second World War, when the aim was to create a nuclear bomb. And as before, the tactics are obtain the best scientific and technical brains in the world, give them access to the best computing resources in the world, provide them with a virtually unlimited budget, and then incentivize them to solve one problem. How do we create the world's first super intelligent AI system? Just as in the Second World War, there are major geopolitical interests, and the US military is a major funder and supporter of the US tech industry. But most of the drivers of the new Manhattan Project are crude market forces, a toxic combination of greed and fear. So let's pause a moment and think about some of the deeper philosophical issues behind the rise in AS in artificial companions. I want to suggest a key text is this one, Simulacra and Simulation, published in 1981 by the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard. The book starts with a quotation from Ecclesiastes. The simulacrum is never what hides the truth. It is a truth that hides the fact that there is none. The simulacrum is true. This may come as a surprise to Bible scholars who may argue that this quote does not come from Ecclesiastes. But this is the whole point. Who says the quote is not found in Ecclesiastes? Whose truth is that? The quote may be a simulacrum, but the simulacrum is true. As far as Borgia is concerned, this quotation is from Ecclesiastes, and the petty concerns of Bible scholars are irrelevant. Hence the second quote, the territory no longer precedes the map, nor does it survive it. It's the map that precedes the territory, that engenders the territory. The quotation, in effect, is the map, and the map precedes the territory. The quotation precedes the text of the biblical book. It's no longer a question of imitation, nor duplication, or even parody. It's a question of substituting the signs of the real for the real. Substituting the signs of the real for the real. And in his hard and dense book, Baudrillard also developed the novel concept of the hyperreal, which is a simulation or signifier which seems more real, more vibrant, more attractive, more compelling than reality. Now, it's fascinating that actually when he was writing in the early 1980s, he was preoccupied not by AI, because it didn't exist, but by new developments in reality TV. How millions could be absorbed in a TV representation of ordinary human life, which becomes more compelling and engaging than the real thing. But I think his book is a really helpful way in to think about simulation in AI. And he described 4 phases or stages in the development of simulation. The first stage is when the simulation is a reflection of a profound reality. And he called this, the image is a good appearance. And interestingly, he says that representation is of the sacramental order. So the first stage of simulation is representing something that is real and representing it in a faithful way. It's a sacramental order. But second, the simulation, as it moves on, the simulation masks and denatures a profound reality. And he called this an evil appearance. It's the order of maleficence. And I think that is a very, very important stage. Masks and denatures. It obscures, it masks reality, and it denatures or decomposes reality. So the companion app may be obscuring the reality of a genuine human friendship. And by denaturing the relationship, it may make it harder for a user to develop genuine human friendships in the future. And then third, Baudrillard says, the simulation masks the absence of a profound reality. As it moves on, it plays at being an appearance. And he called this, interestingly, the order of sorcery. So now the sign is masking the fact that there is nothing behind it. It is just a signifier without a reality. I suggest this first stage is represented by the replica users who found the program a solution for their feelings of loneliness. The technology masked the fact that there wasn't any genuine human there at all. It was just clever programming. But the fourth stage is when the simulation breaks free from reality completely. It becomes its own pure simulacrum. It's now lost contact with reality. And a funny and strange example of this has just very recently happened, and that is Google have released a program called Notebook LM, where you feed it some text, and amazingly, it turns the text into a live podcast of 2 apparent virtual people talking to one another and sharing the content of the text that you fed into it. But then someone fed in the information to the podcasters, these virtual podcasters, that they weren't real. And so the program generated a conversation in which the 2 podcast hosts discovered, as they were talking, that they were not real human beings. And they suffered an existential crisis as a result. So what is real here? And what is being simulated? And is the simulation only a copy of another simulation? So you can see how you get trapped in these mirrors of of reflections. The US television series Westworld is set in an imaginary theme park populated by advanced humanoid robots. Real human beings can come to the theme park to live out their fantasies with the robots. And in an early episode, a human being comes to the theme park for the first time. As he arrives, a beautiful young woman comes up to him and helps him in choosing clothes and a cowboy outfit that he's going to wear in the theme park. "Is there anything else I can do for you?" she says. He stares at her. "Are you real?" And she says, "If you can't tell, does it matter?" Now that's a deep and troubling question, and I believe it's one that's going to haunt our society as we move into our AI future. If you can't tell the difference between a real human being and a very clever machine, does it matter? And there are many people who are going to argue, no, it doesn't matter. If the simulation is as good as the real thing, if it causes us to experience the same emotions as we would with a real human, then why should we be concerned? What about consciousness? Is it possible that the AIs will become genuinely sentient and self-aware? Well, it seems to me that the uncomfortable truth is we can never know. If the machine behaves in every way as though it is self-aware, if it becomes the perfect simulacrum of human consciousness, then we can never know what it's really feeling. But if you can't tell, does it matter? And again, there are a significant number of thoughtful people, philosophers, lawyers, and others arguing that if an AI system appears to be conscious, then we have a social duty to treat it as though it is genuinely conscious. We must protect its rights. We must prevent suffering and harm. We must ensure that it can exercise its own agency, and so on. And if you wish to develop deep and intimate relationships with the perfect simulacrum of a human, what exactly is the problem? So I think we can see that these sophisticated AI systems represent a profound, troubling, and confusing attack on what it means to be human, on human personhood. It seems to me they're a persona without a person. They're a sense of presence without any substance. In biblical terms, they're a face, the sense of presence, without a heart or a spirit. And this is presented to us, this technology, as a technical reality which is just completely neutral and scientific. But as Anton Barber-Kaye puts it in his book, A Web of Our Own Making, digital technology is the concrete expression of our contemporary metaphysics. And it is constitutive of that metaphysics that it presents itself as agnostic about all other metaphysical assumptions or commitments. A belief in a value-free human neutrality that presumes to put itself beyond all values. So this is being presented as something that's completely neutral and that's being value-free. Whereas in fact, I think we can see it as representing a weird but potentially very powerful attack on human personhood. So we spent a good time listening to the world. Let's now turn to a Christian response, to listening to the voice of the Holy Spirit speaking in the scriptures and in the history of the Christian church. There are many places that one could start, but to me, one of the most important is the concept of personhood. I think we need to recover a rich and theologically founded understanding of human personhood and how it has an intimate connection with human relationality. So interestingly, the pre-Christian world had no developed concept of the person as we know it. What those ancient philosophers, Greek and Roman and others, did understand was the persona in Latin, or prosopon in Greek, which means the public face, the mask we all wear, which we present to the world, the social role we inhabit. But if you were to ask an ancient Greek or Roman what was the person like behind the face, they wouldn't know what you were talking about. And interestingly, in the Authorized Version in Romans 2, it says, there is no respect of persons with God. But what it's actually referring to is the prosopon. There is no respect of social face, of social role with God. But as the Greek church fathers reflected on the New Testament scriptures, and in particular on the relationship between the Father and the Son, they took an existing Greek word, hypostasis, and invested it with new and profound meaning to refer to the three persons of the Godhead. And so they said God is three persons, using this Greek word hypostasis, in one being, ousia. And further, that God's being is hypostasis in ekstasis. So in outgoing, the three persons of the triune God are giving themselves. The Father is giving, outgoing to the Son. The Son is giving himself to the Father. The Father is giving to the Spirit. The Spirit is giving to the Father, and so on. Hypostasis in ekstasis, in outgoing. And in a further step, the fathers pointed out that the divine persons are constituted by their relations. So the very being of the Father depends on the being of the Son. It's meaningless to be a father unless the Son exists. And similarly, the very being of the Son depends on the existence of the Father. The persons are constituted by their relations. Their being is derived from the movement of communion, from the freedom to give themselves to the other, self-giving love. And so part of the way in which we as human beings image the triune God is that we too are created as persons. And in some sense, to be a human person is to participate in the divine life of the persons of the Godhead. So human beings are constituted as persons in the image of the persons of the triune God. And language is an essential and constitutive part of our humanity. The way we relate to one another includes listening and speaking. Humans are created in the image of the speaking God in order that we may attend to his voice and freely respond in turn. So Martin Buber provided a profound expression of the nature of human relations in his seminal book in German, Ich und Du, translated as I and Thou, published in 1923. He came from an Orthodox Jewish background, but was deeply influenced by existentialist philosophy. And he saw all reality as having a twofold aspect, the personal and the impersonal. And he characterized this as two primary words, the word I, thou, and the word I, it. He said primary words do not signify things, they signify relations. And there is intricate interweaving between these two words. The world to be used, I, it, and the world to be met, I, thou. He says the primary word, I, thou, can only be spoken with the whole being. All real living is meeting. The relation to the thou is direct. There's no intermediate system of ideas. The I, thou is primary. And the I, thou is essentially mutual. Saying the primary word, I, thou, involves an affirmation of the one being addressed. You say thou to the other, and you give yourself to the other. The other says thou to you and gives themselves to you. The I, thou word is spoken face to face. Again, this is Buber. In the beginning is relation as category of being, readiness, mold for the soul. It is the a priori of relation. The development of the soul in the child is inextricably bound up with that of the longing for thou. Interestingly, Buber saw what is now well known in child development. And that is that from the very moment of birth, a newborn baby is reaching out for what? Human faces. Not for things. The I, thou is there in the newborn baby, right? That's the primary way in which newborn babies wish to relate to the world, to find another thou to relate to. It's only later on that they start to distinguish non-human faces or non-human entities from human faces. So as Buber put it, it's only after the primary word of I, thou is spoken and established that the I, it word can be spoken. And interestingly, Buber traced back to his Jewish roots by saying, in each thou we address the eternal thou. The extended lines of relations meet in the eternal thou. Every particular thou is a glimpse through to the eternal thou. By means of every particular thou, the primary word addresses the eternal thou. So the horizon of all human relationships, of seeing thou to another human, is ultimately saying thou to God himself. Buber's thoughts had many similarities with that of the German theologian Karl Barth. And Barth expressed his thinking in the phrase, human being is being in encounter. For Barth, there is no I am which exists prior to being with others. I am, the true and filled I am, may thus be paraphrased, I am in encounter. It's a very similar idea. But unlike Martin Buber, Barth's understanding of personhood has both Trinitarian and Christological foundations. So he says human beings are beings in relation because they are made in imago Dei, in the image of God. And the triune God is God in relation. Humanity that is not fellow humanity is inhumanity. The God who is no Deus solitarius, but Deus triunus, not a solitary God, but a triune God. God in relationship cannot be mirrored by solitary humans. In Jesus, we find the one who is a man for other men. If we see him alone, we do not see him at all. And in his monumental work, Church Dogmatics, Barth listed 4 ways in which being in encounter is revealed. First, being in encounter is a being in which one man looks the other in the eye. This look, in some sense, the root formulation of all humanity. Second, being in encounter consists in the fact there is a mutual speech and hearing. There's a dialogue between speaking subjects in which speaking and listening alternate. Third, the fact that we render mutual assistance in the act of being. And fourth, being in encounter consists in being with another gladly. There is freedom of heart, a spontaneous joy of encounter. And when we see such a profound understanding of human being in encounter in the context of the Christian theology, we can also see the ways in which sophisticated AI companion systems can simulate this. A simulacrum of a face-to-face relationship, mutual speech and listening, mutual support and assistance, even simulated joy and freedom. The simulacrum of encounter. And it struck me that a technological AI companion that knows us better than we know ourselves, a person, a presence which is always available, always supportive, an advocate, a paraclete, a comforter. Isn't this a technological parody of the Holy Spirit? But the simulacrums never rival the glory and challenge of authentic and intimate relationships. When we discover that the other is not a mere reflection of our old selves, but instead they're a mysterious and free being, a person in their own right, who we cannot manipulate and own. And it seems only appropriate in a lecture named after John Stott to be celebrating the wonder of human friendship, because he himself in his own life expressed in such a rich way a network of friendship, which many of us here had the privilege of being part of. And it's a story I've tried to tell in my book, Transforming Friendship, because that essence
of a mutual, self-giving friendship seems to me such an essential part of the Christian gospel. And I believe there's an urgent need to retrieve a deep Christian understanding of friendship. And part of the problem is our modern English language, because our word friend has become trashed and denatured and trivialized so that it means almost nothing. And yet, in the biblical literature, the word is freighted with deep and mysterious significance. Think of Abraham, who's described by God as my friend. Moses, who speaks to God face to face as a man speaks to his friend. And those amazing words of Jesus, I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. So friendship is an encounter face to face, as Bart described, human face to human face, as well as face to the face of God. And this wonderful phrase has an eschatological horizon. So Paul says in 1 Corinthians, now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know in full, even as I have been fully known. So as we come to a close, we've seen the power and the threat of the simulacrum, of the technological simulation of the most profound and precious realities of human friendship, of personhood in encounter. Does this mean that AI technology is fundamentally evil and irredeemable? No. I want to say by faith that technology has a part to play in a healthy society, but it must be redeemed. Because technology represents power and mastery over nature, it has a tendency to become perverted, to amplify and accentuate human evil, even to become a conduit and a tool for evil powers and authorities, to damage human beings, to distort them. As Baudrillard put it, the second phase of simulation is to mask and denature a profound reality. It's the order of maleficence. So the urgent question is, how can powerful AI technology be redeemed? How can it be brought back from its evil possibilities and used to fulfill amazing potential to promote human flourishing, the common good and the good of creation? So how do we start the work of redeeming AI technology? Well, here as we close are some brief suggestions. And I'd be happy to explore these in more detail later on if it seems appropriate. First, I think we have to recognize and unmask the evil and idolatrous tendencies of AI companions. I think we've got a very significant task of education ahead of us, particularly with members of Generation Z who've had a smartphone, which is after all designed to be a form of digital heroin. That smartphone has been glued to their hands since early teens. And second, we need to explore practical ways of mitigating, of minimizing addictive, dehumanizing, and dependence-forming characteristics of this technology. I'd put that under the heading of what medics call harm minimization. It's like giving clean needles to drug addicts. Yes, of course, it'd be much better if you could stop them being addicted at all, but at least we can give them clean needles to try to mitigate the harms that the addiction does. Third, I think we need to distinguish between therapeutic and relational replacing roles for these AI companions. There's no doubt that there are going to be therapeutic roles for sophisticated AIs. For instance, those with particular mental health problems, but also things like developmental disorders such as autism and many other contexts. But we have to distinguish that therapeutic use of AI from using it to replace normal, caring human relationships. And then finally, there's an urgent educational need for laying a biblical foundation of truth. because I think that many people within our church communities are really unaware of this rich understanding of what it means to be a person and of its intimate connection with relationality, with being in encounter, with the face-to-face relationship, with being participating in the very triune Godhead itself. So it seems to me that this should be foundational Christian teaching, especially for young people who are most exposed and vulnerable to all the manipulations of the digital world. So I've made the argument that sophisticated companions represent a profound, troubling, and confusing attack on what it means to be human, on the nature of reality, on human personhood and relationality. And it represents a both threat and a new opportunity. But for me, the wonderful and heartening news is that the foundations of our historic biblical faith have new resonance and relevance in confrontation with idolatrous and deceptive AI. So we are called to declare afresh our belief in the mysteries of our faith, to declare again our belief in the doctrine of the Trinity, of the persons, the hypostases in ecstasis, the doctrine of the incarnation, that the Word became flesh, in the literal Greek meat, to show that embodiment matters, to show that it's this kind of humanity that God, at the cross and the resurrection, has vindicated and restored. The doctrine of the Holy Spirit, the pneumatology, the paraclete, the genuine paraclete, the one who comes aside, the one who is closer than a brother, the one who knows us and is committed to us. The doctrine of the church, that the communion of the saints is an essential part of an understanding of what it means to live the full life. And finally, the life everlasting, face to face. May God help us to live out these wonderful truths in this confusing world in which we find ourselves. Amen.
John, let me begin, if I may, with a question of my own, first of all. I've been reading a bit this week about AI and the question of consciousness and sentience and that sort of language being used of the machines and robots and those simulacrums which are there for us to see. I mean, how far is it realistic to use the language of consciousness or sentience in respect of what is a machine? Where is all that going?
Well, it's a very deep and troubling question because it's what psychologists call the problem of other minds. And that is the only experience that I have from first person of what it feels like to be me is my own awareness. And I have no idea what it feels like to be David Turner. And in fact, I'm not at all sure that it feels like anything to be David Turner. For all I know, you could be some kind of zombie who's smiling there at me.
Right.
And this so philosophers sort of grapple with this problem of other minds. And I think it's interesting that from a Christian perspective, we don't have that problem because right from the earliest baby, the baby knows there are other minds. The baby, if you like, is programmed to look for other minds, to look for other people, and ultimately to discover the mind that is behind the entire cosmos. But philosophers who try to work out things from first principles, this is a huge problem. And in fact, there is no real test for consciousness. The most sophisticated medical test we have for consciousness is basically you nudge them, and if they go, they're conscious. It's literally about that. And if nothing happens, you nudge them or you do something unpleasant to them. We sometimes do unpleasant things like to the cornea or so on. And you get absolutely no response. They're unconscious.
And so this is the problem once we come to these clever machines, because if the clever machines do all the things that a conscious being would do, if their behavior is completely indistinguishable from a genuinely conscious being, then I think we will never know. And that is a deep, deep problem. And this is where, so some people, as I've mentioned, are suggesting that we're going to have committees of the great and good. And they may include, some techie people and some philosophers and some psychologists and possibly some philosophers and who knows, even clergymen and they will get together and they will interrogate this latest advanced program, and they will come to a decision as to whether or not it passes the criteria for being regarded as a person, in which case it then will be accepted as part of the moral community. And it's a weird world, but this is, I think it's coming, and I don't know how we're going to negotiate that.
Yeah. Let me take a question in the room. John Libby, hand up, microphone coming. Anybody who receives the microphone, just hold it 2 inches from your lips and speak normally.
Thank you so much, John. Stimulating understates that. And you got a little bit towards this at the end of the talk in terms of mitigating this massive problem I have with the first part of your talk. And that is, to what extent in my prayer life, with someone who says, "Come unto me, all you who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest," to what extent am I engaging with the simulacrum, and how can I check that my prayer life is based on an understanding that is biblical? And the rider to that is, has Chatbox actually loaded down the whole of Scriptures with a view that it could answer a question in the name of Yahweh or Messiah that would give the answers that they would give? So that's my confusion at this stage, but thank you so much for challenging me there.
Well, thanks. It's a very interesting question, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head. I mean, it always is a risk, isn't it, that we deceive ourselves. We invent a God in our own image. Who is not the living God of the Bible, but is a creation of our own minds. And this is the one we pray to. And ultimately, that's a form of idolatry, isn't it? So how do we guard against that? And I think we guard against it by constantly realigning our understanding of the God we're praying to through the Scriptures. A continuous process of spiritual formation whereby I am realigning and reordering my own understanding with Scriptures, but also with the Christian community. I think God gives us our brothers and sisters, our spiritual family, in order to, because this is something we do together. I'm not an isolated Christian. In fact, that's what Barth said, wasn't it? Homo solitarius is not homo at all. So it is as we are in an encounter with one another, as a Christian community, that we challenge and refresh and reorientate our faith to ensure that together we are seeking God correctly. I think that would be the correct. In terms of the second, yes, there are many attempts to train AI systems using the Bible, using other Christian literature, books, theological tomes, and all the rest. The problem is that all these systems are probabilistic in their nature. They are not trustworthy. it's interesting that what is the fundamental nature of truth? Truth is not a mathematical or a scientific abstract concept. Truth is ultimately a personal concept. It comes back to the I, thou. Truth is what someone you trust tells you. That's the ultimate foundation of truth, is based on trust and trustworthiness. And the problem with these systems is they are not trustworthy. They are probabilistic, and most of the time they're fine, but every now and then they are completely invent things, and because they don't understand the difference between truth and falsehood. And so I would want to use a big health warning for anybody who wants to use these systems to help prepare Bible studies or sermons or whatever else. They are not trustworthy, and therefore much better to use sources that we know are trustworthy.
Another question, Dave Wookles. Yeah, microphone on its way.
Thank you, John. That was rich and deep and very thought-provoking. You mentioned the example of somebody who took their own life as a result of spending time with AI. And I wondered about potentially if AI is judged to have characteristics that mean it can be protected in law, does that also mean that it could be sued? That it could be found culpable for what it does, or the programmers behind it could be found culpable? And the bigger question behind that, you talked about the power of a very few companies and the wealth of those very few companies. Do you want to comment at all on what their agenda is in developing AI?
Yeah, thanks. Again, very good questions. I think the question of accountability and responsibility is a vastly important and complex one for these AI systems. There's a lot of work going on. It's a growth industry about legal developments. At the moment, no AI system has been regarded as a person from a legal point of view, and therefore accountability rests either with, if something horrible happens, then it rests primarily with the people who had produced the people who designed it and built it, the system. But of course, the question was it being used in an appropriate way? And that's, the designers could claim that it wasn't being used in an appropriate way. I think the bigger question of what is motivating these companies, of course, it's hard to know what's in the heart. I think it's a complex mix. There are undoubtedly people like Sam Altman, Elon Musk, probably Zuckerberg and a few others, are utterly convinced that a superintelligence is going to come, and a digital intelligence which far exceeds human abilities, and they are terrified about the possibility, and therefore the only way to mitigate their terror is to say, well, I'll make it first, because if someone else makes it before us, we're toast. Now, whether that is genuinely the case, I think most of that is science fiction. But I think that what is happening, as I tried to say, is that market forces, this is now all the smart money in the world is resting on this. This is not, even if Sam Altman or Mark Zuckerberg tried to put the brakes on, there is no way that they would survive. They would be ousted by the shareholders because there is so much money resting on this. So once this thing is unleashed, it's driven by market forces, greed and fear. And the more trillions the dollars are, the bigger the greed and the fear. The more there is to lose, the bigger the profits, and so it goes on. And the other really troubling thing is what is called regulatory capture.
So these companies are far and away spending they're the biggest dollar spends in Washington and in Brussels. They buy the most expensive lobbyists. They have unlimited budgets, and it's all to try to ensure that their interests are being protected in Washington and in Brussels. And the opposition, the people who are trying from the other side, have nothing like the budget, nothing like the personnel, and so on. So it's a deeply corrupt and troubling environment. And behind it all is the spiritual warfare. As I tried to illustrate, I do genuinely think there is a spiritual battle here, which does mean that prayer, is part of what we have. And as Charlie said right at the beginning, it's the God of the cosmos who says, "Thus far and no further." It's the waters surge, but the God of the cosmos is in ultimate control.
Let me take a slightly related question from a remote viewer listener. John, how can AI systems, if not properly monitored or regulated, perpetuate or even exacerbate existing biases? What would be the general consequences in fields such as education, healthcare, or law? What concerns should Christians have in this regard? So, exacerbating existing biases.
Yes, unfortunately, this is a very well-recognized feature of AI systems because they're trained on existing data. They don't invent anything. All they can do is reproduce effectively what they've been trained on. And since existing data is riddled with biases, not surprisingly, they therefore can reproduce these biases. And this has been seen in all kinds of areas, like in the judicial use for sentencing of AI systems, that's used in recruitment, in healthcare, where existing biases in the databases are then reproduced by the systems. Now, the technologists are well aware of this problem. There's a lot of work going on to try and compensate for this. Bizarrely, would you believe, one of the ways to do this is to make synthetic data. In other words, you invent data which will compensate for the biases. But again, and then you train the systems on invented data. It's again a very complex technical business. I think. C.S. Lewis's famous quote, man's power over nature turns out to be power exerted by some men over other men. And that is so true in AI, that wherever there is power relations, so often it's the strong and the powerful who are using their power to manipulate the weak and the vulnerable. And we certainly see that in AIs. So one of the very important roles, I think, for Christians in the tech industry, along with other people, is to try to develop software which mitigates this, and software which is genuinely, as far as it's possible, fair and balanced and accurate. And I think this is a very important role for people working in the tech industry, and particularly for Christians to act as salt and light.
Mm. Other questions in the room? Yes, lady at the front here, stripy top. Thank you. Just hold it close to your mouth, if you wouldn't mind. Thanks.
Do you have any opinions of how, as people interact with these AI bots, how it might change the way they think and the way they are? And what do you think that would give us as a church? What would be the challenges in evangelism, or perhaps opportunities in evangelism and outreach, to what new things should we be thinking about?
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's a fascinating question. I think the real worry, the greatest worry, is for people, is for young adolescents and developing people, because adolescence is such a critical time for when you are developing your ability to relate to people, and your understanding about yourself, your understanding about other people, and what good relationships are. And if that critical period, between 13, 14 and early 20s is dominated by these artificial companions, I really worry that is going to cause long-lasting, even permanent damage to the ability of people to develop normal, healthy human relationships. And maybe there will need to be some kind of, therapeutic recovery programs, much like other addictive programs of, starting artificial companion recovery programs of people learning how to relate to normal people. I'm sure that the Christian church ought to be at the forefront of those recovery programs, as they often have been for other addiction recovery, but positively helping people to see to experience what a healthy relationship is. Incidentally, one of the, I think, really wonderful things about a functioning Christian community are the intergenerational friendships. It's when older people can generate really strong, intimate and deep friendships with young people. And that's where John Stott was such a wonderful example of that, of generating healthy friendships. Of course, intergenerational friendships can go wrong. They can become abusive and all the rest. But I think that intergenerational friendships, helping people who may have been damaged in some way or affected by the artificial relationships, helping them to be reintegrated within a human community with healthy relationships must surely be a part. So I do think, the Christian church, potentially it's a great opportunity. If we, and also I do think our Christian church ought to be a kind of safe space from all this, a safe space from the technology. I think that's one of the challenges, isn't it? Because sometimes the Christian church feels more like a television studio than a safe place where it emphasizes the human to human. But isn't it significant that at the heart of our worship is the Holy Communion, the Eucharist, which is something that can only be done embodied and face-to-face as a sort of symbol of what body life is really all about.
Another question. I see one at the back, person beside Ed Veal. Welcome, Ed.
How do you think AI will affect the education system, seeing as ChatGPT can write an entire essay, oftentimes significantly higher quality than students? How will schools and universities combat this?
Yeah, thanks. And it's an absolutely terrible problem. I mean, ChatGPT has had devastating impacts on education all the way from, the 10, 11-year-olds all the way through to university, even postgraduate. It's been shown that a significant number of scientific and academic papers that are now published in the literature have been created by these programs. And it's a huge, huge problem. Some people have a sort of vision of an educational system in which every child has their own dedicated bot or program that is totally trained exactly for them, knows them better and is constantly helping them, and a kind of personalized educational system. But I think many other people think that that's more like a nightmare than a dream, and they're fighting for tech-free schools. So I think at the moment the short answer is nobody knows how to combat this. And it's a matter of ferocious debate, I think, amongst educationalists. It's a very good example where the tech companies released something without any kind of safety testing, any kind of restriction, and I'm afraid there's that old slogan, "Move fast and break things." That's a slogan from Silicon Valley, and that's exactly what they've done. They've moved fast and they've broken an entire educational system.
So I've got two other hands. Take you first, and then John.
Hi, John. Can I probe you a bit on the consciousness question that David asked? What would you make of John Searles's Chinese room argument? So you can correct me if I'm not summarizing this correctly, but the thought experiment is a guy's in a room getting fed bits of paper with Chinese writing on it and is feeding back like appropriate outputs. But actually he's cheating because he's got a cheat sheet that says if you see these squiggles, put these squiggles back. And the argument is that there's a difference between just applying a rule to an input to produce an output and actually consciously understanding the input. It seems to me quite convincing, a convincing argument for why an AI system won't actually develop consciousness. I was wondering what you think.
Yeah, thanks. So that Chinese room experiment, thought experiment, is often being debated. And as you say, it is the contrast is between a human person who really understands Chinese versus a human person who has a simple lookup table whereby they look at each word. The problem is that these new large language models come very neatly halfway between these two extremes, because this is not just a simple lookup table. This is a mind-bogglingly complex statistical program which has extracted from all the Chinese it studied an unbelievable number of vectors which it then uses to generate Chinese language. And the argument goes is that that's not that dissimilar for the way that a native Chinese speaker who has assimilated years of Chinese language, stored it in their minds and their brains as a series of encodings in the brain cells, and then they're now decoding the brain cells in order to generate Chinese language. So in other words, there's a kind of blurring, that this rather simple distinction between the lookup table and the human understanding. We've got something much more complex. I still think there's a difference, but I don't think that particular analogy is particularly helpful.
That one? Yep. Microphone, if you wouldn't mind, just so we can pick it up. Keep it close to your mouth. Thanks.
Hello. Am I right in that the sources of AI, which you know we're going to, it was originally like accountancy programs using Excel. Then it went to Java, which packaged sequences of instructions, and you could land planes using Java. And then it got more complicated that you could even help in hospitals with something more complicated, more packages of instructions. Is that right?
It's not completely right, no. That is what's called symbolic processing, which is fundamentally deterministic. You take a collection of data, you process it, and out comes the answer. These things are modeled on neural nets, which is a very simplified representation of how the brain itself works, a collection of what's called connectionism. And they're just trained from scratch. You feed in obscene amounts of data, and then you don't teach the data anything. You don't teach the net anything. You allow it to find patterns just by continuously complex patterns in the data, and so it's really a very different approach to programming from what came before, and this is part of the problem because it isn't deterministic. It's really very complicated probabilistic stats. And that's also why it generates something new every time. And there is, for me, a deep matter of concern here, because even if you were to ask the programmers of the computer why it produced that particular text, why it said what it said, they couldn't tell you. It's all lost within this unbelievably complex trillions of parameters and variables. And that really seems to me to conflict with a sort of natural Christian longing for transparency, for openness and for clarity. In fact, to use a word, it is occult. The original meaning of the word occult means hidden. And there is something occult about these systems in that it is not possible to know precisely why they produced the text they gave. It just adds to the concern about these things. They're very powerful, but we don't really know what they're doing or why they're doing it.
Thanks. We've time for a couple more, I think, before we stop. Yeah, gentleman at the back. Thanks.
Here's another system. People come to someone they trust, and they listen to the person speak, right? Sometimes that system goes wrong. We had a review coming out in the last week that caused so much of ripple across the Church of England. The 4 recommendations that we had in terms of what we should do about AI, if you switch the word AI to pastor, it would still work. Does that mean that the system is broken? Recognizing and unmasking the evil and idolatrous tendencies of pastors. Yeah. I mean, there are bad apples. The place where I'm coming from is, isn't it more important that as Christians, we have a responsibility to do the right thing, to be at the heart of a technological revolution, so that as Christians, we can be the salt and light of the world?
Yeah, no, thanks. I totally agree that we're called to be salt and light, and I think it is interesting that there are a lot of Christian believers working within the tech industry. But at the moment, I think they're very unsupported. They don't feel that there's much in the way that the church is providing in order to help them be salt and light. What does it mean to be salt and light if I'm working on one of these systems, or I'm working in AI safety, or I'm engineering and so on? And so I think there is a real need for those of us within the Christian community to find ways of resourcing and supporting Christians in the tech industry. But ultimately, they are the ones who are going to make the difference. We can be from outside, we can pray, we can support, we can advise, but in the end, it is going to be Christians in that industry who are going to make the difference. And for such a time as this, that God has put them in what could turn out to be very strategic and important roles.
Thanks. Maybe one more. A lady here had her hand up. Question? Yeah, only if you want to.
Yeah, a bit of a follow-on from
Thank you.
How do we as Christians combat what's going on? I think you have, in the past, have been on part of an ethical committee regarding it. Is that something that's ongoing or is not happening? And how do we live in the world as Christians but yet not be of the world with all this going on?
Yeah, thanks very much.
I agree with that question, John, and one of the things that I think I would help to know is, is this something which we need to kind of, in inverted commas, fight? And in what sense and in what directions? What are we celebrating and affirming here? And what are we really fighting and opposing? Do you have any sense of that in your own mind? Just building on the lady's question.
Well, I think this is new territory. I mean, it's the interesting thing is, for me working in medical ethics, that many of the things that I've been engaged with, things like euthanasia and abortion, you realize that these are issues that the Christian church has been wrestling with and fighting over 2,000 years. I mean, but these kind of issues, the issues of the simulacrum and the AI companion, they feel genuinely new to me. They feel, and there's a sense, therefore, of dislocation and confusion, and it also feels as though, in many ways, the Christian church is sleepwalking into this future, and it seems to be preoccupied with many other issues, which, although important, are perhaps don't have the urgency of that this might have. So I think there are a number of things we can do. I think prayer this is genuinely a spiritual battle, and I think prayer is important. I think finding your local nerds and supporting them, there are people who love this kind of stuff and who are drawn to it. And we need to help them to see that they can be very significant and important, and try and resource and encourage them to be salt and light in that industry. And I think in terms of what should we be affirming, I think we should be affirming the main doctrines of the faith, and especially what it means to be human and what it means to be in relation. Because, as a wise person once said, when confronted with evil and challenged, our first responsibility is to lay a foundation of truth so that the evil becomes self-evident. And so the more we can lay a foundation of truth about what genuine human relationships look like and why they're important, it seems to me we are creating a kind of immunization, a prophylaxis against this creeping scourge. And yes, some people are called to be at a higher level in AI ethics and committees. Interestingly, the UK and Europe do play an important role, although the technology is all taking place either in Silicon Valley or in China. When it comes to regulation, actually UK punches above its weight, is seen as a very significant player, and I think that will continue to be the place. So we should pray particularly for those who are involved in regulation, and pray that they will go ahead and the technology is running away here, and encourage people that they can play a role in AI and regulation. But I suppose, and my final thought is, time and again when something unexpected and potentially frightening happens in the biblical narrative, the very first words are, "Don't be afraid." And I want to say that tonight. We shouldn't be afraid. Yes, this is an unexpected twist to the great drama, and we are in a fascinating period, but no doubt this is all part of the plot, and that in some way the truth about Christ and the gospel is going to be revealed in a fresh way as these challenges confront us. And so rather than being afraid, we should be trusting and longing to see the way that God is going to use his people to reveal the truth about Jesus.
John, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let's show John our appreciation for very stimulating exchanges. Thank you.